Robert E. Howard exists in a kind of unique space when it comes to adaptations. His works and his universe are sort of up for grabs in a way that other literary works aren't. Like, can you imagine if J.K. Rowling died tomorrow, and then the publishing house which had been putting her work out suddenly went all in on rewriting her Robert Galbraith stories as Harry Potter books, resetting them at Hogwarts and adding magic? That would be phenomenally weird. But that's what's been happening to Robert E. Howard since the 50s. It goes the other way, too. In 1976, Lynn Carter published a Thongor the Barbarian story called Black Moonlight, and then 2 years later rewrote his own story to be a Conan tale entitled The Gem in the Tower, and added it to his and Elsbreg de Camp's expanded Conan mythos. Wouldn't that be wild if an author published a science fiction novel today, and then 2 years from now reused the exact same story for a Star Wars novel set on Tatooine? For most of his literary life, which extends much past his 30 brief years on Earth, Robert E. Howard's works have experienced these weird periods of half-adaptation and revision in a way that many other writers never had. Following Howard's death in 1936, his trunk full of unpublished and unfinished works passed into the care of his literary estate executors, and it was picked through by Elsbreg de Camp and Lynn Carter. Posthumous material would roll out gradually for the next 2 decades. This is where we see what we might call the first batch of questionable adaptations. Publisher Martin Greenberg suggested to the sci-fi writers that they turn some of Howard's unpublished historical and adventure stuff into Conan stories. In 1955, Howard's Elborak story, Three-Bladed Doom, was turned into the Conan story, The Flame Knife. His Kirby O'Donnell adventure, The Trail of the Bloodstained God, dropped The Trail of, and Conan was added. His desert set, Hawks over Egypt, moved to Shem, and his 16th century Turkey romp became The Road of the Eagles. The Flame Knife was published as its own novella, and the rest of them were collected alongside Flame Knife into Tales of Conan. I think I'm solidly in the minority when I say that I think these stories are actually pretty enjoyable, with the weakest one being Hawks over Shem. The Road of the Eagles in particular is a really fun, memorable tale. But like I said, this is just the first wave of weird adaptation. These stories set a precedent. Where Conan would be kinda sorta adapted the most, though, is in comic books. I'm mostly talking about the 4-color Conan the Barbarian title here. Savage Sword adapted stories more cleanly, but not always, and Conan the Barbarian was a lot more checkered. Roy Thomas and the rest of the Conan creative team continued the tradition of adapting Conan-less Howard stories into Conan comics for a long time, like issue 38's The Werewoman, coming from Howard's The House of Ereboo. But I'm not going to talk about those ones because we'd be here all day. Sometimes, Conan the Barbarian would half-adapt a story. Sometimes it would seemingly adapt 2 stories at the same time by throwing them into a blender. And sometimes it would adapt a story a second time, sort of rewriting the original adaptation. The first of these happens in Conan 21, during the War of the Tarim arc. The credits page claims that it is inspired in part by Robert E. Howard's The Black Stone story, but that in part phrase is doing a lot of heavy lifting here, because this story feels much more like an adaptation of Elsbreg de Camp and Lynn Carter's story, The Curse of the Monolith. Like Curse of the Monolith, it's set in Conan's Turanian mercenary period. He's lured to a large stone monolith under false pretenses, strapped to the monolith, and then an eldritch beast descends slowly toward him from the top of the monolith. In both stories, metal bands are a secret to the whole ruse. But it's far from a straight adaptation, so it seems like it's kind of splitting the middle without making any mention of DeCamp or Carter. Issue number 31, which I actually don't own yet, adapts The Thing in the Crypt. Roy had been trying to get the rights to the original story, but while Lynn Carter was game, Sprague was not, so he decided to write his own young Conan crypt story, replacing The Thing in the Crypt in the timeline. What we got was The Shadow on the Tomb, which works far better than it should have. Funnily enough, they later did get the rights to the original story and used it as the basis for issue number 92. While the supernatural element is different in both, we've got a sentient corporeal shadow in one and a living dead sentry in the other, the issues are basically the same. Conan is chased into a cave by an animal, discovers a cursed sword which he then disturbs, fights its protector, and then uses fire to kill the sentry. Conan number 31 adds this really fun wraparound narrative that helps attach the book to the comic continuity, but otherwise they're remarkably similar. We either have to accept that Conan had two remarkably similar adventures, very close to one another in time, and made the same mistakes in both, learning nothing from the first, or that one of these stories rewrites the other. If I remember right, Roy Thomas considers the Shadow on the Tomb version to be the more canon of the two for the comic timeline. Issue 37 from 1974 tries once again to adapt two stories at the same time. Honestly, to the betterment of both of them. It was written by Roy Thomas and drawn by Neil Adams, making me wish we got 100 more Neil Adams penciled Conan comics. This issue, The Curse of the Golden Skull, simultaneously adapts Howard's unpublished short story of the same name alongside DeCamp and Carter's Conan yarn, The City of Skulls. Really though, what it does is graft Curse of the Golden Skull onto City of Skulls' Golden Bones. It follows all the story beats of City of Skulls. Seriously, Conan and Juma, neither of which are in the Curse of the Golden Skull originally, are taken to a tropical bowl in the middle of a mountain range. They're enslaved for a time, they risk a daring escape, and then they fight a giant monster that they end up using to kill their enslaver. The comic really just takes the villain and turns it into Rotath of Lemuria, a Thurian Age villain transported to the Hyborian Age. It could be the pacing, it could be Rotath, it could be Neil Adams' incredible art, but it works a whole lot better than the prose pieces that it mostly cribs from. Like, I like Curse of the Golden Skull a lot, it's just like, it's 5 pages long. These stories occupy a somewhat odd place in the literary world. I don't want to make it sound like this has only ever happened to Howard. I mean, you might know that the fourth Pirates of the Caribbean movie stemmed from an unrelated Tim Powers pirate novel titled On Stranger Tides, which they threw Jack Sparrow into and used as the basis for that film. And I didn't even touch on the whole other tangle of related ideas with the debate over editing and revision to Howard's stories and how the movie kind of adapts like 3 or 4 stories. Since his death, writers have not just been adapting his stories very freely, but also making edits that range from a few words to entire revisions to the very structure of the text. Now, this wasn't meant to be exhaustive, because there are dozens, if not hundreds of examples of this. So which ones did I miss? Are there any weird adaptations that you're partial to? Let me know down in the comments, and thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time.